This is the only unexplainable or paranormal experience to ever happen to me. And I assure you, I haven't written a creative writing story since high school. I've tried to tell it exactly how it happened. Some background info for context. I've always had trouble sleeping. Once I'm asleep, I don't wake up. In fact, I usually sleep in and miss half the day, but I have never gotten to sleep easily. It's not a fear thing or an anxiety thing. I just never get into the mindset to doze off. Even in bed, I can just spend all night watching videos on my phone or reading. Before that, it was playing on my Game Boy as a kid. As far back as I can remember, I would even just lie there looking at the ceiling, thinking about things. Wide awake as usual, checking the clock every now and then. Getting more annoyed as more time passed. This is still very much the case. I'm a terrible sleeper with no reason to be, no fear of the dark, and usually no anxieties keeping me up. I'm just a person who can never seem to get to sleep. So, this story takes place when I was 17. I was a student in high school doing only science as my elective subjects and didn't grow up religious. Just for some added background about the type of guy I was. A logical guy who valued facts, evidence, and logic. You know what I mean. I was lying in bed with my head propped up on 2 pillows, watching YouTube videos on my phone. It was around 2:30 a.m., and it was completely normal for me to be awake and watching YouTube videos at the time. I was usually falling asleep at 4 or 5 a.m. and waking up past midday, or even later. It was the school holidays when the first incident happened, which is why I could get away with waking up so late and staying up all night. Anyway, I'm trying to say that despite the very late time of night, I was certainly wide awake, not even tired, and this was normal for me. My bed was just as much a place to chill and watch stuff as it was a place to sleep. So there I was, watching YouTube videos on my phone at 2:30 in the morning, when suddenly I heard someone or something take a very deep breath in. The sound of it alone was so loud and sounded so close to me that I was startled immediately and clutched my phone to my chest so it stopped producing light and fumbled for the volume button to turn the video down before just hitting the power button on my phone. The video played for a second more and then finally fell silent. During this time, I was still hearing the deep breath. Then there was a slight pause, and then, again, as loud as it could be, a deep breath out. It was slightly raspy, almost like Darth Vader, but less robotic, not machine-like at all, and even slower breaths too, but similar in the way that you could hear the wind of every breath. The deep breaths continued, and I looked at my bedroom windows and to the foot of my bed, my phone still clutched to my chest, as I was pretty much frozen in fear, simply due to how loud, slow, and deep these breaths were. Each breath in and out lasted 2 or 3 full seconds, and was as loud as a breath could be, without actually being vocalized. It was as if whatever was making the breathing sounds was going ah with every breath out before making a small O with their mouth with every suck in, but not gasps or vocalized noises, just breaths. My mind was racing as to what sort of animal could make these sounds. But where I live, there are no big animals at all anyway. So I reasoned maybe the vents of the air conditioner, heaters, or whatever were making some weird sounds. But no. There's no small animal, or really any wild animal in the country, with the lung capacity to take breaths this deep. Certainly not in suburbia where I live, and definitely not inside my bedroom. The heating and cooling still work fine and silently to this day, over 6 years later. And besides, there are no vents even close to my bed. All the while, I was having these thoughts and trying to justify the noise. I was still listening to the breaths. So I kept staring at the foot of my bed, where I thought the sound was coming from. But really, the only reason I thought the sound was coming from the foot of my bed was due to the fact that behind it was the only spot in the bedroom I couldn't see. So my brain just immediately imagined someone crouching there. This was just because the breathing was so loud and sounded so close that it was. and still is. Impossible to me that it wasn't coming from inside my room, from right next to me. I honestly think it sounded even closer to me than the foot of my bed. When trying to reenact it, to tell my friends, and when I recount this story to people, I couldn't and still can't make my breaths as loud and as deep. And I'm an adult male. Only something with a huge lung capacity could possibly exist. Maybe a huge man. Maybe a giant football player. But that's it. When you try to draw out a breath for a long time, it gets quieter. If you try to breathe loudly, your breaths get shorter. These breaths were both loud and long. So I stayed there frozen, my phone still clutched to my chest, staring towards the foot of my bed, then to the closed curtains, then back to the foot of my bed. For a few moments, I thought maybe someone might be pressing their face against my bedroom window, behind the curtains, and breathing loudly to scare me. But I ruled it out because it was simply too loud. The windows were shut and locked, with curtains in front of them that would have muffled the sound far too much. This was like breathing in my ear. With each possibility, I ruled out while trying to justify what was going on. I just got more fearful of the noise. So I just lay there in my empty bedroom, listening to these deep, ominous breaths, my eyes fixated on the foot of my bed, for realistically probably about 3 or 4 minutes. But it felt like 15 before it just stopped. The breathing didn't really fade away. It just kind of stopped as quickly as it came, maybe getting a tiny bit quieter for a brief moment before the sound went away entirely and vanished with one last breath out, and I was alone again. I lay there for probably another 10 minutes without exaggeration, with my heart pounding in my ears, before I calmed down enough to have the nerve to turn my phone screen back on. Even then, I just put it on my bedside table quietly and slowly, and then I lay there all night. I know I sound like a pussycat right now, because it's just breathing, but it was honestly just that much of a whack experience. And then it happened again, about 4 months later, at a similar time of night, maybe 3 a.m. It went on for about 4 minutes, slightly longer than the first time, I believe, and I reacted in the exact same way. The deepest, loudest, breathiest breaths I've ever heard, sounding like they're coming from within my bedroom, like a huge man was standing right over me, right at the foot of my bed, or even closer, right next to it. But of course, there was nothing and no one around. I've never been able to justify what happened at all. I know it seems like nothing because it's just breathing, but all these years later, I got goosebumps typing this out. I also want to note that at the time I wasn't taking any drugs, and I've never been on any sort of medication. Since then, I've even had sleep paralysis and used psychedelics and recreational drugs a fair amount. I've taken high doses of acid and smoked a lot of weed, and I've never had any sort of delusions or psychosis at all. This certainly was not sleep paralysis either. I wasn't asleep, and there was no paralysis. Sure, I was frozen in fear as I felt vulnerable lying in bed in my underwear. But both times I fumbled shutting my phone off, clutching it to my chest, and both times I was looking around my room, turning, my head back and forth frantically. People who have experienced sleep paralysis know that you are truly paralyzed and can't move at all during the experience, and you wake up from it. I can remember everything before, during, and after the events in crystal clear detail. It never happened again after those 2 times, and it is the only thing in my entire life that I truly cannot justify or explain. And I feel like I've thought of everything. Some animal in the vents is having its breathing echoed and amplified. Some weird problem with the vent itself. Someone outside my window is trying to scare me. Someone outside my door, in my closet. All of these, I've ruled out as impossible. I know I've said this a lot, but the breaths were just too loud and organic. Despite them being uniformly slow, deep breaths, there was definitely a slight human-sounding irregularity to them in volume and in rhythm, which was just terrifying. The fraction of a second pause in between the breath in and out was the scariest part for some reason. Lying there, anticipating the next breath, none of it makes sense. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded like a giant man with an insane lung capacity standing right over me, looking down at me, taking the deepest, slowest, loudest breaths that he could muster for 4 minutes before suddenly disappearing into nothing. And then I was alone in bed again, scared. This may seem like not much, since it's just noise compared to other people's stories, but I assure you that this story is true and not exaggerated. I tried to describe it as accurately as possible. I've told this story a million times to people whenever paranormal stuff comes up in conversation, and it only makes it scarier to me that I've experienced sleep paralysis and drugs, because it just makes me more certain that this was real life. I know it was, and it happened twice. I was as sober as a judge, wide awake, and calm at the time, of course, before the breathing scared the snot out of me. This will sound trite and corny. Yes, I am still afraid to hear it again. And this will also sound corny. But I've been in real dangerous situations before, and never even been half scared as the pure dread and vulnerability I felt those 2 nights for those few minutes, and for the rest of the night lying there after it ended. It was truly messed up. I did not exaggerate or embellish any part of this story. Sorry if I repeat myself too much, but I felt like I needed to hammer home how visceral and intense this experience was. So if anyone has any similar experiences, I'd love to hear them. As I said, I'm not religious or superstitious, and at the time it happened, I was even less so, but I kind of believe this was a ghoul. I know they all say, it's real. I saw it. I know they all try to convince you to believe their stories. They're fairy tales. They're monsters and ghouls. But this is different. This is a warning. Heed it, and you might survive what I'm about to tell you. I work as a gardener for a private company. I've been doing this for over a year now. They send me to a location, and I clean and tend to whatever they tell me to. The work mostly gets boring after a while, because I always work on my own. But luckily, I have some headphones, so I can listen to my music and chill a bit while doing whatever needs to be done. However, one day, this all changed. I remember it very well. A bright, sunny morning. There were a few clouds in the distance that might become rain in the afternoon, but that wasn't of concern at that moment. I was mowing the lawn with the lawnmower while jamming to my favorite 80s music. The work was a bit sweaty, but pleasant. I enjoyed the sun warming my skin and bringing life to the place I was working. It was a bungalow that belonged to a company that rented them to people who wanted to stay in the area, but didn't have amber. For those who don't know, bungalows are a type of shack, but more modern and a bit bigger. Imagine it as a small house type thing. All this life and warmth, however, was a big contrast to why I was working there. Several children had gone missing in this part, and because of that, they had to close until further notice, whatever that may mean, which led to rapid decay and overgrowth. So they called my company, and my company sent me. Unfortunately, they didn't know much about the children. They disappeared without a trace, and nobody could figure out why. They suspected kidnapping, but even that wasn't confirmed. I was uneasy working there. I didn't necessarily want to be there, but I'm also not scared easily. So I worked on it and did my job. At a certain point, however, it happened. As I turned off my lawnmower for a quick refuel and pee, my headphones started to crackle as if my signal was starting to fade. At first, I thought the battery was empty, but that couldn't be, as these headphones give a small warning when the battery is low. Confused, I took them off to see if they were damaged or if something was messing with them, but I couldn't find anything wrong. After several minutes of looking on my phone to see if the Bluetooth was disconnected or the battery was dead, I noticed something. Odd. It was quiet. I don't know how many of you go out regularly, but if you do, you would know nature always makes sound. From rustling leaves to the blowing of the wind, there is always something. However, at this point, there was no sound. Nothing. As this realization hit me, the hairs on the back of my neck started to rise. A faint whimpering, or even whispering was coming from somewhere in the park. My blood froze. What was that? Chills ran down my spine as I started to hear this clearly now. It sounded like a small kid. My brain went into overdrive. Was he or she in danger? Was it one of the missing children? I knew I had to do something. I opened my phone again and started calling the emergency services. It rang, but nobody picked up. As I looked up, I saw why the storm was getting closer, and it was probably blocking the signal. I was on my own. I didn't want to waste more time, so I started going towards the origin of this sound. A medium-sized bungalow, black-colored and abandoned, alone in a grassy field. As I got closer, small raindrops started to come from the sky. The storm was closer than I thought. I heard it more clearly now. A small girl crying and whispering. I couldn't hear what she said, but she was clearly in distress. I couldn't handle it anymore, and not thinking about danger, I started bashing on the door, kicking it in the hope it would give in to the force I was using. It was a mistake. The moment I started banging on the door, I heard a loud crying scream and something heavy falling. I was so mad at myself. I should have looked through the windows first. Loud, heavy footsteps came towards the door. I dashed out of sight, running for cover to the side of the building. I could hear the door crack open slowly, along with the heavy breathing of what seemed to be a large male. Some coughing, and the door slammed shut again. Did he think it was nothing? Was this the alleged kidnapper of those children? Hadn't he noticed me while I was working in the park? My heart rate went down again. Not much, but a bit. I knew I had to do something, but I had to be more careful now. I slowly rose from my ducking position and started peeking through the windows as I walked around the house. Empty room, empty room, empty room, empty room. It was abandoned. Had I gone crazy? Too much time in the sun. I was questioning my every sense when it started again. Whispering, wimping, crying softer this time, as if it were muffled. I wasn't crazy. It was too real. And scared or not, I had to save this girl. I gathered all my courage. I knew it was stupid, but the urge to rescue this girl was bigger than it all. I ran towards the door with all my force, not stopping at all. Bang! The door flew open as I crashed into the house. Barely holding my balance, I rushed forward. "Come out," I screamed. "Come out, you sick fuck. I'll show you what happens when you do this type of thing." I rushed through all the rooms, kicking the doors down one by one. Yet, empty, empty. I was stunned and nailed to the floor. Was this real? Once again, no one was in this house, even though I could have sworn that they were. But the whispering had fallen silent again, with not a sound to be heard. However, I heard a small crackle and a door opening. I turned around and saw a door that I had missed while rushing in. As my blood froze again, it slowly opened, but no one was there. In a trance, I walked towards the room, not knowing what mistake I was making. It was a bedroom, a normal, simple bedroom. A closet, a bed, a nightstand, and a window empty once again. Had the wind pushed open the door? That couldn't be, as there was no wind inside. I looked around and noticed. My God. Even thinking about it, I noticed claw marks on the walls. They started out as small ones, the size a fighting child would have made, but they grew larger in size as they progressed, leading to the closet. As my eyes fixed on this simple, two-man-sized closet, my heart stopped. It started opening slowly, very slowly. It was almost pitch black inside, but as it opened, there was more light inside, revealing a small child standing in it. She was sobbing, tears running down her face as she whispered, "Sorry." The closet, now fully opened, revealed this girl and the pale, distorted face looking over her shoulder. It was the face of an old woman, but it looked like it was melting, the flesh barely hanging on her face, her lips so weak, revealing the rows and rows of sharp teeth in her mouth, going all the way to the back of her throat. Her eyes were black as ash, with no life in them. I could only stare at this monster as it rose to its full length. It was kneeling when in position behind the girl, but as it stood up, it had to bow down to fit in the room. It had a long neck, as pale as her face, going into a distorted body. Her legs were the same as a human's, but a lot longer. But the most disturbing thing was her right arm. Starting from her shoulder, running all the way into the back of the child's neck, clawed into the flesh, with blood dripping down. I felt as if my heart had stopped. The creature started moving its mouth, but words didn't come out. Instead, the girl it had buried its arm into started whispering and crying again. I knew I was looking at my end. I couldn't move at all. Yet, one part of me awoke, wanting to fight for life one more time. I rushed forward, screaming the most brutal curses I have ever said, and jumped with both feet towards the creature. I planted it in her soft body and kicked as hard as I could. The creature started crying and cursing as well, angry about my move. I stood up and started running, hearing it do the same behind me. Clawing for my neck, I reached the door of the house and smashed it shut behind me, not stopping to run. And I kept on running. I am at home now. Nobody knows what happened there yet. They won't tell you either. So I'm typing this to warn you. I hear her whispering. She followed me home. She's close. Do not read.